All right, well, it is 2 p.m. Eastern, so we're going to get started. My name is Kate McNair. I am the Teen Services Coordinating Librarian for the Johnson County Library, and I want to welcome you today to YALSA's webinar on community and family engagement. I'm filling in for Linda Braun, our continuing education consultant for YALSA. I'm a former board member and I've been involved in YALSA for just about 10 years now, and I'm an avid webinar attender. And so Linda asked me to step in today while she is facilitating a workshop in Texas. So I wanted to give you guys some some information about the session. When the session starts, I'm going to mute everybody's microphone, but you can feel free to unmute your microphone up in the top management queue of your Zoom recording to ask questions. You can also use the chat box to ask any questions, and I'll be trying to kind of moderate that and pull those out for our presenters in case there's some questions that come in there that they miss because they're going to be busy presenting. And I also want to let you know that today's webinar is going to be recorded, and the recording will be shared out with you as participants later and posted on YALSA's continuing education website. If you're also interested, there's going to be a Twitter chat on this same topic later this month on the 23rd. You can find more information about that on YALSA's website. And so to begin today's presentation, I'm pleased to introduce to you our panel on community and family engagement. Our moderator is Bernie Farrell, Youth Services Coordinator for the Hennepin County Library. The panel includes Jenna Brune, Neighborhood Educator and Field Coordinator for Learning Dreams, Ben Weiss, Associate Librarian for the Hennepin County Library at Minneapolis Central location, Anna Schwint de Groot, Service Manager, Children's and Teen Services at Hennepin County Library. And there's one panel member who wasn't able to make it here today because of a family emergency, but Bernie wanted me to make sure to mention that she is here in spirit and she's very important to the work that they do at Hennepin County Library. Joy Spica, Neighborhood Educator for Learning Dreams Program and Development Coordinator for Culture Club. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our panel moderator, Bernie.
Thank you, Kate. We're glad to be here. Before we start our panel discussion, I'd like to take some time to set the context. This panel represents a 5-year collaboration between staff at Hennepin County Library, Minneapolis Central, including the Best Buy Teen Tech Center, and library staff serving both youth and adults, and staff from the University of Minnesota's School of Social Work Learning Dreams project. This collaboration supports emerging adults ages 20 to 25 in identifying their dreams and goals and how they want to work toward them. It provides access to caring adults and mentors, professional level tools, a safe space for creative work, and opportunities for leadership. Hennepin County Library and Learning Dreams have worked together on a number of different projects since 2007. In 2013, when the Teen Tech Center opened at Minneapolis Central Library, Learning Dreams staff were partners at YouthLink, which is a nonprofit in downtown Minneapolis that helps young people between the ages of 16 and 23 on their journeys from homeless to hopeful. At YouthLink, Learning Dreams staff heard directly from emerging adults about the Teen Tech Center and the frustration those emerging adults felt about being unable to access both the creative and technical resources and the youth-focused staff at the Teen Tech Center and the teen portion of the library called Teen Central. The need to explore ways to use the Teen Tech Center at Minneapolis Central Library beyond the hours it was available to teens resulted in the idea of pursuing ways to make the Teen Tech Center available to emerging adults ages 20 to 25 in partnership with YouthLink and Learning Dreams. For additional context before we go into our panel discussion, Minneapolis Central Library is the largest branch of the Hennepin County Library System, which includes both locations, both small and large, throughout urban and suburban Hennepin County. Youth services at Minneapolis Central includes the Children's Library, Teen Central, and the Teen Tech Center. Teen Central and the Teen Tech Center are spaces dedicated to teens ages 12 to 19. Other community members are invited to visit Teen Central to access the teen collection, but staying there to hang out, read, or use the computers is for teens only. Emerging adults is a newer concept and is currently defined as the state of being beyond adolescence but not yet fully adult, trying out adult roles, but not yet immersed in them, on the way to adulthood, but not there yet. So we're on a panel today that is highlighting community and family engagement in teen services. And this collaboration focuses on emerging adults, many of whom have experienced homelessness or precarious housing, trauma, and poverty. So I'm going to open it up to my panel now. What's the connection here? And my first question, now that we've been working, I went to the second question already. I'm stopping.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to stop our slideshow so you can see our video of our faces. Can you see that? Yes. There we go. Start my video.
There we go. Now we can see you. Can you lower the camera just a little bit?
Yeah. Yes.
And you have to get close to
There we go.
Okay, there you go. So we're all going to scooch in. We're in the audio production side of the recording studio here. So we're sitting tight. So Bernie's question was about how this partnership really got started and what was the motivation behind it. So as Bernie said, when Teen Central opened, it was really focused on serving 12 to 19-year-olds. And based on our experiences in other libraries, we sincerely thought when Central opened that we would mostly be serving middle schoolers. That was not the case at all. We actually serve most users that are 17 and up are the users of Teen Central and Teen Services here. And we also learned a lot about our patrons and their needs. Many of our patrons are in transition. We know that there are 6,000 youth that are homeless per night in the Twin Cities, and many of those youth are hanging out downtown and using Central Library. So that really had changed our perspective on who Teen Central and who Central Library should be serving. And we realized that while we were really focused on providing supportive services for patrons up through age 19, we then really had nothing to offer people after the age of 19. And that was unfortunate because it's the same time that a lot of other services for young people cut off. So we were trying to think of a way to keep our core services to teens because that's also an important group to reach. And we know that the needs of a 15-year-old and the needs of a 21-year-old are really different. But we also wanted to figure out a way to serve this older group. And we wanted to do that by providing them both a safe place, but also to provide the kinds of supports and mentorship that families might provide and that are more typically found in youth programs rather than adult programs of the library. We also really wanted to focus our services for this emerging adults on helping them build job skills and self-advocacy skills because they were making that transition to adulthood, adult services of the library. So this program is really about, our desires for a program for emerging adults was really about building those self-advocacy skills. We found that the best way to do this work was through partnership. And as you're going to hear in our presentation, we were really lucky in that we found a wonderful partner in Learning Dreams because we really share the heart of our mission, both at the library and at Learning Dreams, is really, really similar. And so that has provided a really strong foundation for our partnership. And the great thing about partnerships is that your partner has skills that you don't have. So they have a lot of skills in building connections with young people that are downtown, a deep network amongst youth and amongst resources for them. So yeah, so that's sort of the background of how we got started.
And then from my perspective at Learning Dreams, when this got started, we had been partnered with the library. As Anna mentioned, some of the leadership at board organization had recognized kinship in mission. And so we were doing a series of small pilots at branches throughout the city, getting to know each other, trying to imagine what could a partnership look like and just exploring a bit. And at the same time, we were partnered with YouthLink. So myself and other direct services workers from Learning Dreams were visiting drop-ins several times a week. We'd been there for about 2 years. and had built relationships with young people, did a lot of learning around what it means to be a young person in downtown Minneapolis, what it means to be experiencing homelessness in downtown Minneapolis, and then quite a bit about the everyday lives and struggles with poverty, living in survival mode or crisis, experiencing systemic and interpersonal racism, and just what it means to be out here, along with all the beauty of their ideas and their assets and their talents. So we had some of that to work with, but in doing the connecting work, we were realizing, again, emerging adults, we hadn't necessarily thought about what it means to be 19 to 25 and having not only your social services programs end and age out, but also your access to creative spaces and tools. A lot of that programming ends around high school years. And here still, we had this huge group of young people who were ready, they were interested and curious, but access to tool and resources and teachers, unless you had money and know-how to connect to those things, it just wasn't an option. So that crossover became really exciting when we realized that the Teen Tech Center was willing to consider their capacity to host not only the teens that the space was designed for, but that they would consider activating that space in its dormant hours to serve this older population in a small pilot.
Now we're ready for question number 2. So now that we've been working together for 5 years, as you look back, what ways have both the library and Learning Dreams changed? What are some of the strengths of the partnership and some of the challenges?
Bernie, can you repeat that one more time? It was just a little hard to hear you.
I'll get very close to the mic. Okay, now that we've been working together for 5 years, as you look back, what ways have both the library and Learning Dreams changed? What are some of the strengths of the partnership and what are some of the challenges?
Maybe to start us off, I can name one big change is that this has grown. That initial pilot was 10 young men. They were young men that we had worked with for several years, so we had relationships, and they were also deeply connected to one another. So they had formed a bond navigating experiencing homelessness in downtown Minneapolis, and they've been looking out for each other. They had established relationships with us, and so when given the opportunity, we approached the program as a way to advocate for themselves. So this was a tight-knit group with long-standing relationships to us and each other, and we had a very focused project that they helped design. We built our guidelines, and then we looked at what do we need to do to maintain this opportunity. But since then, it grew from 10 in year 1 to 20 the next year to 36 the next year, 52 the year after that. And now Ben and I have hosted 30 people unrepeated just in our first 4 weeks this year. So Ben and Joy and I have had to learn the pros and cons of having a very intimate, very focused group, and then opening the doors a little wider, more drop-in style, so that it was more accessible to different people. And I think now one of the challenges is not deciding, well, we're just going to be intimate or we're just going to have our doors wide open, but trying to find what are ways that we can make both of these things happen and make room for both experiences.
Yeah, I think the real strength of the program has just been the access to the equipment that we had this wonderful Teen Tech Center and people that were really dying to use it. We were able to provide that access. And then Jenna and Joy and Ben do so much work to give the participants a real feeling of community and safety so that they can be creative and they can learn and grow and go through that sort of developmental process that has been really interrupted by their experiences on the street, being homeless, experiencing homelessness. So I think that those are really the strengths, is that we are able to put sort of the stuff that the library is good at, access with the strengths of youth workers around, creating space for young people to be themselves. I think the other thing that's been really strong from the library's perspective is that this has been a really iterative process. This partnership has been about trial and error. And every single time we do this, we get together afterwards, we debrief, where we have been really intentional about debriefing, and evaluation has been ongoing. And so we really take all the feedback from the youth and the feedback from library staff and from Learning Dreams staff, and we are always trying to make the program better. And a lot of times that actually means focusing on a lot of details, which is something that was sort of surprising to me when I started working on this project. It was like, oh, we're spending a lot of time like talking about, you know, how we're going to get youth out of the space to the public bathroom and back. But really, it's like those small experiences are what make the experience for the participants. And so it's been, I think, especially when you're working with vulnerable populations, that you really have to like take the time and think about their experience from start to finish and make sure it's got a lot of dignity, you know, that their dignity is intact through the whole experience, and that they feel really respected here. So taking time to debrief about that and figure out those details has been a strength too.
I think with that, so when we do our evaluations, we do them at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year. And because this project has had time to evolve, and it's had, each year we've got more and more new participants, but we also have young people that have been there from the beginning. So when we sit down and have conversations throughout the program, and then certainly at the end, and then we're also asking people to write out qualitative responses to questions about what was working, what do they get from it, what would they do differently if we get to do it again. Those that stick with us have gotten to see the follow through from both the library and from Learning Dreams, and see their ideas put into action, see themselves as consultants, which they are. We've also been able to add the role of paid youth leads. And so those young people have a different level of responsibility, of facilitation. And so they also get to come behind the scenes and learn a bit about how these systems work, or how do you send an email, or set an agenda, or be at a formal meeting, and experience both the power of planning, but then also seeing their ideas come to life in the program. And on both ends of that too, when something works or when something doesn't, I think that constant evaluation and being in the loop with the actual participants that we are working alongside has been critical.
Here I am again. So I'm gonna turn this over to Ben. Ben is someone who has taken on a new role in the library and been part of the work in various ways over the last 5 years. How has this partnership changed the way you work and the way you define your role?
Yeah, so I started out working in the circulation department at Minneapolis Central, and then I moved over to information services in 2016, and then started working with Learning Dreams and the Friday Tech Center project shortly after I moved over to the info side of the library. This partnership has really been central to how I think about my role at the library sort of in general. I'm an adult services associate librarian, but I work in both adult and youth spaces. And I think I was brought in sort of intentionally to make sure that as people age out of youth spaces, that they can see a familiar face out at adult desks. And it's been a great way to sort of bridge that gap from young spaces or youth spaces to adult spaces. At Minneapolis Central, I'm in the Community Engagement and Public Programming Department. And a lot of my work focuses on reaching out to different marginalized groups and to making the library a welcoming space for everyone. I think this partnership has really helped focus the library's work on being responsive to what patrons actually want, and to creating an environment where they're comfortable, where we're comfortable asking for feedback, and where patrons are comfortable expressing what they need from us. And sort of a good example of this kind of grew out of the Friday program. We host a monthly open mic night now, and 2 years ago in the Learning Dreams program on Fridays, we worked with a local spoken word artist who spent a day talking with the youth about constructive feedback and active listening. And then the youth leads planned an open mic night where writers could workshop pieces that they were in the process of writing and get feedback from their peers. The night was a really great success. And then they, as that cohort of youth leaders started to age out of the Friday program, as they all turned 26 out of our 20 to 25 target range, though that youth cohort approached the library separately and asked if they could turn the open mic night into a regular program. And I've been working with my supervisor to make that an option and to make that happen. But I think that's sort of illustrative of how this program is working in the library in general. It's focusing on providing a space for people to feel comfortable. They built something on their own and then approached us to make it more part of our regular services and to make it more, to kind of bridge that gap into being a special thing to being something that we just offer. And I think it's been great. Everything I've done with this program has been really positive, and I'm really happy to continue to be a part of it.
And to that end, with Echo, what's really neat about it is now, as Ben mentioned, those youth leads found a different role, and together we're able to support them and learning the skill sets to having your own contract and managing that. They have a presence, Ben's in that space, and now those that are in both Teen Central and Teen Tech's regular hours, the younger youth, those that are in our program in the 20 to 25-year-old range, and adult services, little bits of all of those populations show up at Echo, are able to enjoy that space, share their artwork, and then see our faces again in that mix. And it's just a really beautiful network or net that's been a spin-off from this whole project.
Thank you, Ben. Now I'm going to ask Anna, what has your role been as the Youth Services Manager at the Minneapolis Central Library? And I'm going to add one extra thing. Also, if you could say a little bit about how the Adult Community Services Manager, Dylan, has also experienced change in his work.
Yes, yeah, that's a great question. I am affiliated with this program because I manage youth services here, which includes the Best Buy Teen Tech Center. So a lot of what I do to support this program is to manage a lot of the internal partnerships that are required, and then some of the external partnerships. I mean, we've been talking about how Learning Dreams and YouthLink have been strong partners for the last 5 years, and we've found a lot of ways to work together. It took time to build those relationships, partially because we have different working styles. You know, the library is part of government. It's got a lot of rules. Things move kind of slowly. So I think we all just kind of had to adjust to that. We'll figure out how to work together around those limitations. And we also sort of had to figure out when were we going to kind of push back against sort of the kind of stricter side of working in government, and when were we going to just be like, this is what it is. So it's been a lot of trial and error, like we said before, in figuring that out. The other thing that I do a lot of is just making sure that there's really good communication between the youth services staff, because this is their space primarily, and they feel a lot of ownership over it, and it really is their responsibility to make the Best Buy Teen Tech Center be a nice place. And so we just want to make sure there's really good communication between everyone that uses the space, that we have all the supplies we need, that all the equipment is working, that we can refer youth that are aging out of teen services into the program on Friday, and keep that momentum, that creative momentum, and that connection to the library going. So it's been a lot of just making sure those connections are strong. Another thing that I really learned was when I started working on this project, I came in the first year that Ben did it as well. And I really thought oh, we're going to need a lot of technical training, right? Because we're going to work in the tech center, and we're going to need to know how to use, audio production software and Photoshop and all of the like technical tools that are in this space. And what we learned was that we really should have just followed the model that's already in use in the tech center, which is that you need to know enough to like get a young person started. But for something like audio production, unless you're going to go get an associate's degree in like audio engineering, you are never going to really learn enough to be helpful to someone with a deep passion. So what you really need is just kind of a willingness to sit down next to someone and try things out and figure it out with them. And then that made a lot of space for us to bring in community experts and artists with that expertise, which turned out great because it makes another, part of what the program does on Fridays is it builds the network of these young people. Like they don't have a big network. So we're introducing them to a lot of different professionals and people that are working as creatives and kind of helping them learn that, you could be an artist for a living. So that's been a really cool kind of side. What am I trying to say? Yes, please.
Because as a community partner, especially working with a large organization, having the freedom, and part of this is just trust, having a team where we're making room for to learn from each other, to trust each other's expertise, but also trust in budgeting. A lot of times when you do projects like this as a community partner, everybody wants to know what it is before you start. And I'm coming from a critical youth work perspective. And so my perspective is, I don't know what I need to do until I get there. Even 5 years into this program, we'll have a sense of it, but we need to know who is showing up, what are their interests, what is the actual need, and we're not going to know that right away. And if we think we're not doing our job right. So having the trust and the flexibility for Ben and Joy and I to get going, get started, see what the needs and the interests are, and then bring in those experts that are specifically relevant to, a skill set that we don't quite have, or a common interest, and then certainly an expert that is culturally relevant or representative of the young people that are showing up. I think one of the strengths that I've heard in our exit interview is that people be feeling pride for their community. And I think part of that is in seeing experts that are representative of themselves, or that can help them imagine what it is like to be a creative or a tech person in this field. And then also seeing each other in a different way once they're able to experience each other creatively. And a lot of that opportunity generated there is by having the trust of a community partner to know that we need to wait and see what's going on before we can tell you what we're bringing in.
Yeah, and I think the other part of the kind of my learning around what kind of training we actually needed was, not only do we not need the tech training and it worked out so well because it made these opportunities for outside presenters, but what we actually needed was for our staff to get trained on things like youth homelessness and trauma, and how to help someone that's going through a difficult time, harm reduction, all of those topics. And so that's what we've really changed our focus to, and that's where we provide more training and support, is actually more around the issues of how to build those relationships with youth. Which, as a youth services person and a teen person, it's like, duh, right? Because we are about relationships, and I knew that. But you just have to, you learn as you go that really what we can offer from the library more than anything is those relationships with young people. Okay, the other thing I wanted to just say was just how youth services and adult services are working together, which is that Dylan is my counterpart on the adult services side. And so, he and I we meet about this project kind of separately, just so that we kind of have our ducks in a row, both about how we're asking for financial resources, just make sure that we're really on the same page about that. And then also about staff time and training, so that, Dylan supervises Ben, and I supervise staff that work in the tech center. So we're just gonna spend time making sure that we're working in complement with each other, and not, trying to accidentally get in each other's way. And I think it's been great for our adult services person to start to see this age group and this kind of programming as part of adult services. I think that that's a real shift in thinking. And so that's been a real positive as well.
It also allows us then too, when, you know, Dylan shows up to visit, or clearly everybody knows Ben, for the young people that we're working with in here, or just in general in downtown Minneapolis, with those ties and relationship and trust that's been built, then we can refer and bring those young people and emerging adults to programs in the wider library. And people are more willing to go because they see Ben's face, or they've had a positive experience in even this physical space. It just opens up kind of like the threshold for trying out an entrepreneur workshop or a photography club or chess club or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I guess we just have a lot to say about this topic, because I have one more thing, Bernie, which is that you know, the other great outcome of working adult services and youth services together on the issue of people experiencing homelessness, right? Because it doesn't discriminate by age, is that when we do things like the trainings around how to work with people that have experienced homelessness, that has a ripple effect through our staff and through all of our services at Central. And then kind of, it's not sole credit to this program, but this program definitely had an influence on the thinking of staff here. But we have actually, as an entire library system, we have made changes to better support our patrons that are experiencing homelessness, such as fine forgiveness, such as not needing to have a permanent address to get a library card, and some other changes that we've made. So, you know, this program doesn't take the sole credit for that, but it is part of like an intentional move on our part to recognize the full spectrum of patrons that we're serving, and making sure that our policies and our best practices, you know, aren't putting up artificial barriers in the way of you know, these young adults participating in the library.
I'm not going to move all the way up, because I just want to ask Ben if you can elaborate on some of the scheduling changes you made as an advocate for the program.
Yes, thank you. So Bernie's asking about scheduling changes that were made for this program. And so that's another thing that I had to work with Dylan on, and he was really happy to do it. But when we initially worked on this program and we pulled Ben in, Ben was working every other Friday and Saturday. So, and that's what all associate librarians did. He worked Friday and Saturday. And so we had to we were like, well, it just makes sense for our patrons for Ben to work every Friday, but we had to push back on that sense of fairness about schedules, right? So that, you know, well, now he's not working every other Saturday. But when we really thought about what's best for our patrons, and we put our patrons at the center, you know, him being here every single Friday is just, it's a no-brainer. It's what makes sense. Is that what you wanted me to get at? Yes. Okay.
And Jenny, when we were talking about this, you talked about how having a space where you could get to know the young people and then bring in a referral or someone that might be a good connection for them, that was more helpful than giving like a cold referral.
Oh yeah, that's always on our end. One of the changes that was really positive for Learning Dreams, we're project-based, so we're at different sites, and in downtown we were mostly based at YouthInc, and we knew that a lot of young people came here and we'd have meetings, but being able to have this program as an anchor spot where young people know they can come to visit us. And then also now just as a regular meeting space where so many of these youth are already in the library. It's free, it's accessible, there's bathrooms, there's you know, all the assets that a library carries. It's really been a great help to have these then very tight relationships where we can do, you know, sit and brainstorm with the young person, develop a goal plan, maybe go find a book, but better yet, find Ben or another trusted librarian or whoever it is and tap directly in, share an introduction, do problem solving or reference interviews or whatever it is, but in a very human rather than transactional manner has made, it's awesome now. Now I see young people making goal plans with other young people and saying, oh, we got to go find Walter in trademarks or whatever the resource is, that it's become very naturalized within the community of youth that have been long-term participants in this program.
Yeah, I think that's been one thing that I think has been really great as a library staff working in this program is when people will say like, oh, I wish I knew more about how to apply for grants. That came up one time after we brought in a working artist who talked a little bit about how she was getting grants to pay for her living expenses while she made art. And then I just was able to check in with everybody and say like, hey, if you are interested in getting artist grants, we have this foundation database and I can show you how to access it and how to start searching for grants and things like that. And it's nice to be able to be in the library and work with people, and then as things come up in conversation and just naturally be able to provide a bunch of resources that the library has that people might not even think to ask about, that just sitting around and talking with folks and making art together, we're able to sort of let people know a lot of the different resources and databases that we have and access to different things that they already had, they just didn't know to ask for. So that's been a really positive, I think,
and that's
on my part.
contextualized.
Yeah.
I think that's been another beauty of this program is as we've grown to understand how to work together, that again, we don't need to line up, well, this is our curriculum for the whole session, that instead we sit together at the table, we talk, we're casually making art, but because of the level of conversation and, you know, occasionally we have presentations once they show themselves to be relevant, but just like Ben said, that we can be having a conversation and then suddenly a specific resource is contextualized, it's relevant. If there's a bunch of people interested, we can sit down as a group, or if it's a one-on-one conversation, that we've got enough youth facilitators, youth workers, and library staff that one of us can dip out and go show them the piano room or show somebody how to look something up on the library system. And it's natural, so it sticks more than just a presentation for the sake of presenting something.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is for the whole panel. When you think of the young people you've worked with over the last few years and the growth of the program, what do they say makes it successful?
I can start with that. Having done years and years of these evaluation conversations, I think the things I'll stick to are things that have come up every year pretty strongly throughout the final exit interviews. One is that finding a pride in community that I mentioned. Again, seeing people who are on a career path and successful coming in to visit us, but then also this being in the tech center and sharing this creative space also makes a space to be differently with each other. So we've had a lot of young people saying, well, I never knew that person was a poet, or I didn't know you knew how to sew. I didn't know I could sew, you know, whatever it is, but finding a different sense of pride. We always have a continuum of appreciation for the space. On one really practical level, just having a physically safe space or emotionally safe space to be for a couple hours on a Friday, and the freedom to do just that. If somebody just needs to sit and be quiet, that's a really positive choice for a lot of these youth. So having that room all the way up to appreciating the opportunity to have a very structured, maybe like support for a structured goal or support to learn a new technical equipment or whatever it is, but that whole continuum of we're just happy to see you to, all right, let's move on to step 3. You've been, you know, moving through a very specific process. Another thing that we've seen over and over is because the tech center offers the space to, come in and work on an audio project or paint or write or build a robot or whatever it is. And it also allows for you to be brand new or an expert. A lot of youth have come back happy that they could come as a group, that made it easier to come with peers and experiment, and that they had room to both not know or to teach the adults in the space how to do something. And just having room to both be at the beginning of a learning process or to become the teacher, and then to be able to share their feedback, whether that's snack or we need to rearrange the pattern of the day, that they've been able to offer that feedback or were asked to begin with, and then seeing a response and a follow through. Even if we couldn't make the thing go, that there was an effort made to say, I heard you and we tried, and cool, let's do it, or this is why we can.
So here's our last question before we open it up to questions from the audience. So for the panel, what advice would you give to others about developing long-term partnerships that are responsive to local community need?
I guess one thing that I've come away with from this experience is just, I think a lot of times in other parts of the library, we do evaluation or feedback just because we know we're supposed to, and it gets shelved and doesn't actually change how we do things. And I think this has been one of the programs that I've worked on in the library where feedback has been, and evaluation has really been central to how we keep running the program. So as it's making sure that we are being responsive to community needs has been sort of built into how we do it. We each day, each year, each part of it is sort of going back to, well, what did they say they wanted? How can we best serve that? So it's just sort of a shift in at least how I've been in other library programs of making that the #1 goal, is just responding to direct needs and not trying to sort of shoehorn things into something that we think we are giving them, and making sure that it's actually just, well, what did they say? And going back to the evaluations.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing that I've learned from this.
Mm-hmm. And that evaluation doesn't have to be, you bring in a university researcher and they study your program and ask a bunch of complicated, and 2 years later you get the report. I mean, a lot of our evaluation is actually self-reflection and taking the time to stop and write down what we experienced in our programs. And I think that's good qualitative evaluation on top of the feedback that we get directly from young people. Mm-hmm. So just lots of time to record our experiences, reflect upon them, and then debrief as a group, take what we've learned together and then enact it and do the process all over again. And for, we've been doing that for 5 years, and hopefully we'll do it for another 5. So
right.
It's just
I agree. In addition, I think that, this is our specific project in our specific context with the resources that were available here. And so one of my hopes for this training is that people are getting kind of inspired ideas, thinking about who's in their community and neighborhood and what ideas have you had percolating. So I think one key piece of advice that I would have is that with that little spark, whatever it is, idea, that you make sure that you bring the community to the table on that and from the beginning. Mm-hmm. To make sure that your community partners are at the table from the get. Maybe you've got a bit of an idea that you've pitched and it looks like it might be possible, but spending time with the direct services workers, both within the community organization and the library, to see their thoughts, and then certainly the participants that you're hoping to work with, that they're there through the process of planning, evaluating, and evolving, and that you stay in that conversation. Second, that I think has been key here, is having some patience and curiosity. I think community partnerships can be really challenging, like Anna mentioned earlier, when you've got different priorities, you're coming from different perspectives. So what we've learned to do over time is to just hold on to that curiosity, and as opposed to running with assumptions, especially when it comes to a policy or a practice or even just a certain person's way of doing, to ask and try to get to the bottom of it. Because when you do take the time to do that, I think we find there may be a whole perspective that you've never considered, or there may be some changes that need to be made. And if you really look into it, then you can kind of see where are those spaces that we might need to make individual changes, organizational changes, or system changes. Now that we understand a little bit about why we're doing something, or find that we were on autopilot or off base, and that taking that time and holding that curiosity can go a really long way for everybody that's involved. And then the other thing I want to note is that consistency in staffing that the library made room to do, both in finding out who really had this project at heart and helping them to be a part of it, but making the room for us to spend time before, after, and during to get to know people. Because I think those are probably some of the main hitches that we've had along the way here, is when somebody just gets assigned to a project or just gets tossed into the mix and they haven't had a moment to learn about why it matters and who it matters to. That's when we run into bumps, and that's also the strength when we've been given the time to do that. And I know for large systems especially, that's a really complicated thing to do, but really is a game changer.
Agree.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, we're open for questions from the audience.
You can feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can put it in the group chat and I'm happy to read out the question. I've also got a couple that I can start with that I've been kind of collecting from our chat while people think of them. So the first one was, while you guys were talking towards the end, there was kind of a whole conversation happening in the chat about kind of how do we build relationships with teens, not just the teen staff at the library, but how do we make sure that all library staff are open to teens, are seen as welcoming to teens. And Anna, maybe this is a question to you. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but what kind of training do you and your staff have in terms of the whole library that help them competently and confidently work with the teens and emerging adults that you engage with?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's not easy to do, especially when you work in a big library and people work in lots of different departments. I think we know that teens use all of Central Library, right? They don't just use Teen Central. And so we do different, we have offered different trainings. We just got done with a training that we had offered for our security officers, because that was often a place where security officers were encountering our teen patrons. And so we did a training for them about youth development, some of the information about what's going on in teen brains with impulsivity, and then we talked too about how the youth services staff are really an ally for our security officers in terms of helping them kind of talk through interactions that they may have had and how they could go differently in the future. So we got a lot of great feedback about that, and we're gonna actually offer a version of that training now for all the staff that work at Central Library in September. So I'm excited about that. I think it'll be good to, hopefully it's not brand new information for a lot of our staff. I think that different efforts to provide this information for staff has happened many times over the years, but I think if you aren't living, breathing youth services or youth development or youth work, you might kind of be like, oh yeah, I kind of like remember my own time as a teenager, or I know a teenager, and they're kind of they can be kind of unpredictable, but that's really like all you really think about with them. So I think anytime that we can get groups of staff together to like talk specifics about what teens need, I think that really helps.
And I know there was one training before I started this program that youth services put together, but it was open to any staff that worked at Central. And that was specifically about trauma-informed care for young people. And that was really helpful for me. Like, I think I took that training the summer before I first started in Learning Dreams on Fridays. And that was sort of a nice introduction to how I could do better and better serve young folks. And I thought that was really useful and helpful.
Do you want just a straight up youth worker answer? And I'll use this for like a practice answer versus a youth development answer. Because it's one thing I found that has been key in our success, but is really difficult for people to grasp what you're doing. And that is, if your schedules allow in some way for somebody to just be sitting in the teen area doing a thing they love, it really doesn't matter what it is. I know one of our first connections at Teen Central, it was a youth worker, and she sat and knit in Teen Central. Not setting out to teach knitting or engage knitters, but doing a thing which could be drawing a picture, looking at a book about antique cars, I don't know, whatever it is, but something that you generally care about, and just being present and doing that thing. Young people will come to you on their terms, and it makes for a much more natural conversation and starting point. And then on the flip side of that, when there are teen or youth events, taking the time to do that, whether that's in the library or if it's in your own personal schedule. I know quite a few young people know Bernie because they'll see her out at their events, and it's really meaningful. You know, or we'll have security or somebody else come through at Teen Tech, and we can just take a second, oh, look at so-and-so is working on this thing. And it's just these small moments of pride or interaction go a really long way in building those relationships. And sometimes that just really takes sitting there and being open to whatever happens or nothing happening, except for you walked by you and you seem safer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that response got quite a bit going in the chat about kind of being your honest and authentic self and being able to bring those, the things that you're passionate about into work was really powerful, and people are still kind of chatting about that. There's been a couple of questions kind of about the resources that are put towards these projects. So, you know, how do you get the buy-in from managers and staff to allow the time? You've talked a lot about things that take time. Building relationships isn't something that happens right away. So how do you get managers and staff to dedicate the time to it, the budget, and where does that budget come from?
Sorry.
I'm coming up for that one. This is Bernie. I would say Hennepin County Library as a whole is very committed to supporting work that really responds to community need, and that our county is very focused on disparities reduction, and particularly looking at issues of any humans experiencing homelessness, no matter what their ages are. And so, so this project really dovetails with goals and priorities that we have as an organization. We have long-standing connections with the University of Minnesota, and since Learning Dreams is a University of Minnesota project, that's another way that that comes together as a connection. And we have a very strong fundraising arm, Friends of Hennepin County Library, that has graciously fundraised and supported this project over all the years that it's been in existence. We do have the Teen Tech Center, which developed from different funding, but thanks to Anna and other people in the organization, supporting, looking at ways that we can leverage these resources that are available for teens 4 days of the week, but then are sitting unused other days of the week. How can we leverage these resources for a wider range of community members, especially realizing that our primary community downtown is that 17 and older youth. So, so it really behooves us to pay attention to that and to respond.
We had a question from Dylan about do you engage with any teen or emerging adult parents? And do you create programs specifically for that group? And how did it go?
We both go at this?
Yes.
So that's something that we continue to navigate. It can be challenging to have little ones in the tech center because there's a lot of stuff everywhere. So for us on Fridays, we don't advertise it's okay to bring your little one. That said, when it comes up, we try to make accommodations for that day. We see how it goes. We point out what is available down in children's services, and we kind of navigate it as we go, because we know that we also need to maintain that space for people who aren't parents to do work. But we do it case by case basis. I do think that's one area that we could probably grow as time goes on, and seeing, since we do know so many young people who are parenting at the same time, how might we respond to that? A second thing I'll add is in that very first cohort, we had some parents, but we had a lot of young people who were connected to smaller children. So some had needed to leave home and become homeless because there was too many people in the house. So there were still, younger brothers and sisters, or they were connected to cousins far away, or whatever the case was. These young men all had littles that they cared about. And so we decided to adapt the Read to Me program, which was initially set up for parents who are incarcerated. And the guys did a little bit of training around how to read children's books, which I really wish we would have recorded. It was one of the funniest things I've seen. They're all giving each other the business, trying to say, you don't know how to quack like a duck, right? Or whatever it was, but they practiced reading children's books, and then they made the recordings of the books that they'd chosen to send to children they cared about, and then those recordings went off along with hard copies of the books for the children in their lives to have. So that I thought was a kind of fun adaptation of a specific parent program that was made relevant for the group that was here.
And I think too, at least from my perspective, like trying to unlearn some assumptions about young folks parenting, that's not necessarily the kind of environment that I was brought up in. And so just trying to not to withhold sort of white middle class American style parenting from this population of folks that has a different culture and has different needs and different background, and not immediately jumping in and thinking like, oh, they should just get a babysitter or whatever. Like, that's not realistic. Like, so kind of being open to not having my assumptions met all the time and just kind of rolling with what the young folks that we work with actually need and what is relevant to their life and their culture.
Mm-hmm. And again, that goes back to all of this navigation of systems and rules and policies and how we're doing, checking in and making sure, do we have the safety, growth, and dignity of whoever we're sharing space with at the center? And once we start there, now how do we move?
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, thank you. That's all the time that we have for today. If you're interested in this topic, please join us for a Twitter chat on August 23rd at 7 p.m. Eastern by using the hashtag YALSACE. And there were a lot of comments today about getting your fellow library staff comfortable working with teens. This is part of a webinar series on the Teen Services Competencies for library staff. And that toolkit is a great place to start. February's topic was on interactions with teens and is recorded and available online on YALSA's website. I'll add a link in the chat chat box. And then you can join us for YALSA's next webinar on cultural competencies and responsiveness, scheduled for September 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And you can register on YALSA's website, and I'll add that to the chat as well. Thank you very much to our panelists, and thanks for everybody for your participation. And have a great afternoon.